Alfred Saulniers, welcome.
Thank you very much.
How do you say that in French?
Alfred Saulniers, bienvenue.
One more time?
Alfred Saulniers, bienvenue.
Well, is that what it says on my TV screen once in a while?
I don't know. It's
A lot of French has a lot of French influence in this area. Has had an impact, hasn't it?
right. But the thing is, it's not been all French from one particular place. In the New Bedford area, you have a large part influence from French-speaking Quebec. And that is broken down into two different groups. A larger, overwhelming group of people with French ethnic background and a much smaller group of French speakers with Irish ethnic background.
Interesting.
People who had come over from Ireland and settled in Quebec, and then much later on, their family members came here. You have people from France, metropolitan France, and then some of the French islands throughout the world, some of those being French people of color. Mm-hmm. You had Belgians, and you had Swiss. Those last two in much smaller numbers.
Would any of these tribes war against each other?
Not war, but when you
I
look
think
at the
we're a little bit better than
when you look at the organizations, some groups were restricted to people from Quebec, others were people with an Acadian background, so people from the maritime provinces,
Right.
others European French,
Right.
and some they all got together.
Yeah. My father was born on an island in Greece, and there'd be an attitude with the other islands,
Right.
you know.
Of
So
course.
that happened with the French as well, I'm sure.
Yes, it did. It did.
Where did they come from other than that one area and France and the maritime, and then come down here?
Well, that's an interesting thing because if you look at the people who came from France, their documents indicate their destination is New Bedford, and they already had a contact in New Bedford, usually a family member. Mm-hmm. The people who came down from Quebec, well, they had a lot of choices of French-speaking cities in New England, and they usually tried out 3 or 4 before getting to New Bedford. Often there was a family member here, and they came to visit. The Acadians tended to target New Bedford because of economic commonality. They had gone into whaling originally. Later on, they went into the fishing industry.
Interesting. Did the French also go into textiles and other industries as well?
Well, that was the issue growing up. People always told me they came to work in the mills. When I asked about whaling, they said, no, they never went whaling. They came to work in the mills. But later on, there was so many that you had a beginning of a true French-speaking community, ranging from religious organizations, where you had priests and ministers and nuns all speaking French or ministering to the French. You had doctors, all people in the different health professions. You had small grocery stores where you'd go in and expect to speak French with everybody in the shop. Mm-hmm. You name it, down to all different aspects. You had movie stars from New Bedford of French-Canadian background.
Like who?
Gosh. There are... Well, first of all, they were way back in the era of talkies.
Oh.
Before talkies, silent films. Their films were mostly lost. And, because so many of the old nitrate films were lost, you had a guy named Frank Dufresne. He was in maybe half a dozen different films, of which maybe one has survived.
Wow.
You had another woman who was, she went off to Boston and then to Broadway and then did a short film career. I think one of her films or two survived, and then totally left films, got married, moved to South Texas, and that was it.
More of this amazing discussion in a minute. But first, please like, follow, and share The Phil Show now. Thank you so much. Let me thank the good folks at iGreen Landscape, your one-stop solution for your residential and commercial property management. Whether it's snowing or whether you're mowing, let Team iGreen handle your landscape and hardscape year-round. From spring cleanups to commercial snow management, I recommend the good folks at iGreen Landscape. Call for your complimentary consultation today. You're a local author. How many books have you authored?
Local books? Local
yeah.
type books?
Right.
3 that have been published, yes. The 2 volumes of the picture history.
Right.
And then this latest on the French.
Right. How did the picture history of New Bedford, how did they welcome it? Tell me a little bit about, it must have been huge work putting all of that information together to match the photographs.
It was totally unexpected. I had been working on the French, and Joe Thomas, the publisher, said, "Can you put that aside and work with us on this sort of general history of New Bedford? We're going to bring it up from the one published in 1983,
Right.
and that should take about 6 months."
And it took how long?
Well, we have 2 volumes that are out. We have much of the research and writing done for a 3rd volume.
Yes.
So that's been well over 13, 14 years.
That's awesome. That is. What's the most important thing to remember about the migration of the French from the north into the New Bedford area? What's vital for us to understand?
Well, you had French who came and left. Not all of them stayed. Let me give you an example. Back in the 1790s, when New Bedford was just starting off its career as a major international whaling center, some people in New Bedford got paid a relatively large amount of money by the French government to lead to a rebirth of whaling in France. And that was fine. However, France then went on and got into problems with some of its neighbors and went to war with them. Now, whale ships are slow. They're not really equipped to outrun anyone, and they don't carry guns. And the whale ships were in danger out on the high seas, so the owner said, well, let's send them all to New Bedford.
Wow.
With French crew members. And some of them stayed here for a while. They got different papers, they got American papers, and they went whaling from New Bedford. Once France was back at peace with its neighbors, they left.
Right.
And so they took off. Even some of the people who came to work in the mills, they would come for a short period of time and then go back once they had met their immediate needs for money. Or in some cases, you had people coming here working in the mills during the winter and then going back to work on the family farm during the summer.
This is fascinating. How many generations would you say it took to come down to this area and settle? How many years?
That's a hard one to say because a lot of the early tales have been totally lost.
That's what I want to hear. The lost tales. Al, give me one. Give me one lost tale that is forgotten history locally.
Well, the French Chamber of Commerce had put out in 1920 a document for people who wanted to become naturalized American citizens. And they mentioned that the first two people who came to New Bedford were named Gobeil, Gobeil, and Vincent. And they came in the 1830s. Nobody knows anything about them. They were supposed to have come down to work in whaling, and yet totally forgotten. And part of the problem with the early people who came down is that there were so few French that they assimilated. Their names changed.
Right.
They married local women. They didn't go to a Catholic church because in many cases the Catholic Church hadn't been formed yet. And so nobody knows anything about them.
More of this amazing discussion in a minute, but first, please like, follow, and share The Phil Show now. If you're ready to finally make your biggest dreams a reality, let my friend Jared Methia at Milestone Mortgage Solutions get you your next mortgage or your next home loan. Jared is a trusted local loan officer who works with some of the most reputable companies. Jared reminds me if you're a first-time home buyer or maybe you're looking to refinance. He says, go to him. And I, too, recommend Jared Methia, providing you with a stress-free experience. Call Jared today for a competitive rate, for quick approvals, and for one-of-a-kind personalized service. That's Jared Methia at Milestone Mortgage Solutions. You can now watch The Phil Show whenever you'd like. Like, follow, and share The Phil Show now. And catch us wherever you catch your favorite podcasts. Like, follow, and please share The Phil Show now with a friend. The Phil Show now. Let me take your name, Saulniers,
Right.
with an S.
Right.
Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yes.
Why does it have an S?
It has an S as a result of a mistake on my great-grandfather's marriage certificate.
Okay.
When he came down with about a dozen children, they had only that document as proof
Right.
of what the family name was. And so for a while, after the turn of the 20th century, all the Saulniers in New Bedford had the S. And gradually over time, the parish priest said, but that's not how you spell that name. And the S's got lost.
What was New Bedford's greatest moment?
That's an interesting question because I'm an economist, so you had two basic economic booms for New Bedford. You had the whaling boom, and the greatest moment there was probably around the mid-19th century. And then you had the textile boom, and the greatest moment there was probably in the mid-1920s, so before the Great Textile Strike and before the Great Depression.
Of course. And that was it, those two periods. Do you see anything else? How about the fishing industry
The
itself?
fishing industry came much later. Mm-hmm. And in the book, I tend to end my coverage with the textile strike, with the onset of the Great Depression. So I'm not going into the real boom for the fishing industry yet.
Right. You've been all over the world. You've been, yes. How many countries?
Oh, good Lord.
Exactly. Exactly. What does New Bedford share with the rest of the world?
New Bedford has a lot of different cultures. You can go around and hear people speaking other languages that you know. Spanish being the most prominent these days, but there are also other languages, Portuguese as well. But I've been in stores where I've listened to somebody speaking and say, what is that? And then it dawns on me like 5 or 10 minutes later, that was Russian, and I knew what they were saying.
How many languages do you speak?
Fluently, French, French, English, and Spanish.
Wonderful.
But I did Russian as an undergraduate.
Children today in America don't usually speak more than one language, unfortunately. Even if they take it in school, children elsewhere speak at least 2 languages or more.
Well, I'm lucky in that I grew up before households had televisions. So before you had this English language present in the home, and I grew up in a very strange environment because at home we spoke French, and next door to us they spoke Polish, and next door to them they spoke German, and next door to them they spoke Portuguese, and finally on our side of the street there was an English language family.
And what was life like?
We all played together with no common language. It was fun.
That's the most fascinating part of it all. And maybe that's what we can learn from history. Thank you so much for sharing with us. What didn't I ask you that you would like our viewers to know about your new book?
Well, I was going to talk about one family when we were mentioning fishing.
Yeah.
The Blank family. They had, there are a lot of them that came down, and a number of them I mentioned in the book had actually changed their name. So if they were dealing with the church, so somebody was getting born or baptized or married, it was always LeBlanc. But if they were dealing with civil authorities for the census or for inclusion in the city directory, their names were always White.
Wow. That is fascinating.
And you had this weird identity thing that went back and forth. Is it French? Is it English?
And why?
Part of it was just getting to fit into the new culture. There was a Unitarian minister who had gone back to his family name of Boivin, but when his father had come down, he translated it. And so this minister was born under the name Drinkwine.
More of this amazing discussion in a minute. But first, please like, follow, and share The Phil Show now. Thank you so much. Carefree Homes is an award-winning home improvement company. It's been family-owned and operated since 1978. For over 46 years of business and thousands of satisfied customers, this company is A+ rated. It's an accredited member of the Better Business Bureau. And listen to this, no payments until the project is completed. How's that? Financing options are available for roofing, siding, windows, doors, decks, you name it. CarefreeHomesCompany.com. Call for a free quote. 508-997-1111. Carefree Homes Company. Al, in your new book, The French of New Bedford, whaling takes a very significant part of the French story. Unroll that for us.
Okay. The reason is really deliberate. When I was back in high school, I remember visiting the Whaling Museum, and after seeing all the different exhibits about different ethnic groups, asked about the French Canadians. And I was told, no, they didn't go whaling out of New Bedford. They came here to work in the mills.
Was that correct?
Let me get to that.
All right.
Okay, so this was back in the early 60s. When I moved back to New Bedford in 2000, I went to the Whaling Museum again and posed the same question. This time I had a docent who was a little bit more aware and said, well, there were some, but they were few and far between. So my next step was to go to the public library and see Paul Sear, the genealogist. Now, I was lucky in that I had met Paul when he started first grade. He went to grammar school and high school with one of my younger sisters.
And for people who don't know who he is?
who he was.
Or was?
He was the lead genealogist for over 30 years at the public library, somebody who knew incredible amounts about every single aspect of New Bedford.
Amazing, yeah.
And he said that in 30 years of working at the public library, he had only ever encountered 3.
Wow. 3.
Now, here's my problem. I'm a professional economist, and I knew that if you had young men with no jobs up in Quebec, or young men seeking adventure up in Quebec, and New Bedford, with lots of jobs and adventure, was only an overnight train ride away, they had to have come. And the question was how to prove it. Luckily for me, in the public library, in the genealogy room, they had a card catalog with all the whalemen listed by names. And I said,
interesting.
So many of the French have names that start with L-E or L-A. Let me go through the L's. And so I brought up my portable and sat down, and I pulled the first drawer and the second drawer. And by that time, I had about 60. So I went to Paul and I started to show him. And by the time I finished, I had about 150 French, Canadian, or French whalemen whose names started with L-E or L-A. Never mind the other parts of the alphabet. And I thought that was a fantastic discovery. And then later on, when the Whaling Museum created a database, I did the first ethnically based research using that database.
Without your research, wrong information would have been continuing to go out.
And what it meant is that the young people of French or French-Canadian background from the area did not have the kind of pride of place that they can now.
Mm-hmm. Do children today enjoy speaking other languages like you did when you were a kid?
I can speak for my daughter and granddaughter. My daughter was lucky enough to grow up speaking French. She started that in first grade. And our granddaughter was doing French. Now she's doing Spanish.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you this question, but I want the answer in French. All right? Why is your book so important?
Mon livre est assez important parce que c'est la première fois qu'il y a une histoire complète de la population francophone de New Bedford.
Beautiful. Thank you, Al.
Thanks, Phil.
What did you say, by the way? Would you translate for us?
I said it was the most complete history of the French in New Bedford.
Bravo, bravo. Thanks again.